Hey all, it's great to be here at TechChill. And before I start, I really want to commend the organizing team for picking a topic like this because normally when people talk about growth, it's almost always all the metrics and analytics and process stuff and ads and CRO and all that other stuff. But the key is that unless you have the right people in place, all of your growth efforts don't really bear the kind of fruit you want them to. And so this is a really critical topic to be talking about that doesn't get the kind of attention it needs. And the reason I came to this topic was when I was writing my book, Growth Hacking for Dummies, and I was looking at what topics I wanted to cover, I realized that there was no data about the kind of work styles and characteristics of great growth people. And this was a little strange because for a field that is so obsessed with data, we all have our business metrics and marketing metrics and sales metrics, and we're so good at tracking and measuring all of those things. There was surprisingly nothing about the people data. Everything I read was very anecdotal about, oh, these growth people are a wonderful mix of left brain and right brain, and they're very analytical, but they're also so creative. And I was like, that doesn't really help me identify, like, if I wanted to hire somebody or I'm starting a growth team, like, who should I look for then? And so that's where this journey began. And just as we have so many tools to measure marketing numbers and sales numbers and all sorts of business numbers, I found a tool that helps us quantify work style behaviors. And this was a tool called the Predictive Index. And just like uh, any tool you use helps you quantify, let's say, user behavior on your app, this was a way that I found that we could quantify our own work style behaviors in the workplace specifically. And this is different from personality tests like Myers-Briggs or similar ones, if you're familiar with those. And what this tool allowed me to do was to then quantify work style behaviors in a very specific way. And this is based on a lot of science from 60, 70 years ago that basically says we have a lot of inherent drives that we are born with. And those translate to certain needs for the way we want to ultimately behave. And that's how work style patterns express themselves. And this tool, which was a behavioral assessment for work styles, uh, quantified work style behaviors through these four factors, which you see on your screen as A, B, C, and D. And if you look at the bottom left, under the infographic, you'll see there's a little plus minus sign, which is like a midpoint. And your factors could express themselves to the right of them, which is, as you see on your screen, is called high, or to the left of them, which are expressed as low. And I don't want this to become a talk about the predictive index, but this is important to understand because everything I'm going to show you was a function of the results I got. And so this is just a base understanding of when you measure these work style behaviors, they're measured through the lens of these four factors. And depending on your behaviors, these four factors can show up anywhere in the middle, left, right, in any combination. And through this tool, you're able to quantify work style behaviors in 17 distinct patterns. And what you see on your screen is just one example of how these patterns look in real life. And again, they can be anywhere, left, right, middle, in any combination. And when I saw this, I developed my first hypothesis, which is that growth leads have a very specific work style pattern. And this was, again, informed anecdotally by the kind of growth people I'd met, I'd worked with. I'd had the pleasure and honor of starting my growth career with the godfather of growth hacking, Sean Ellis, and I made him take the survey as well. And everything was based on through the lens of what I had observed. And so what I did was survey over 30 growth leads from companies of different sizes and different countries and continents. And these are from companies you may recognize, like MailChimp and Drift, and even companies you may not realize had growth teams like IBM, and smaller ones as well. And what I found was that there isn't just one work style, that different work styles started to dominate. And this was interesting. And so I'll walk through some of these. So the first work style, is called the Maverick, which if you're as old as me or as excited about the sequel, Top Gun, this is like that character, right? Who just did not obey rules, completely out of the box thinking for solutions. Failure is not a thing, right? And so this was my hypothesis that great growth leads would be Mavericks. And these are the names just given to these work style patterns. All of these 17 patterns have names. Uh, but I was surprised at first to see the emergence of these other work styles. And the other one was the individualist. And individuals are really persistent, results oriented people. And this makes sense too, right? Because if you work in growth, the one thing that's constant is a lot of failure. Like you will do test over test over test, and they will not work. Right? And you need a certain kind of almost bulldog style, work style who not let go until they've achieved their objective. And so through that lens, the individualist work style started to make a lot of sense. And the third one also, in retrospect, made sense because the persuader work style, which is really an influencing work style, is important with growth because the cliche of growth being a team sport is absolutely true. And growth is not about this one magical growth hacker sitting in a corner trying to do things. It's an entire team aligned around, a North Star metric which quantifies the value we deliver to our customers, and having the whole team in the organization rowing in the same direction towards growing that value we deliver. So this makes sense as well. And when you look at some more detail of these individual work style patterns, you start to see that they share a lot of common characteristics, right? They're all about challenging the status quo. They're all very goal oriented. They're all very results oriented. It's just which specific, part of their work style manifests more than the other is what gives us these three different work styles that I noticed in all of these growth leads. And this is important because this then leads to the next hypothesis, right? That if you have growth leads that express a certain kind of work style, then for them to be successful with growth, their work styles need to focus on innovation and agility. And there's a knock-on impact with this work style, which I'll show you as well. And I could use the predictive index to almost map out the work style behaviors of these growth leads and even the impact on their teams through this quadrant, which is just a reflection of specific work styles that all teams tend to express. And depending on the situation, depending on the team, the stage of the company, or even the specific organization or they will focus more on one of these quadrants versus others. Not to say that they wouldn't also pay attention to what's happening with what they need to work as in the other quadrants, which I will get to a little bit later as well, right? And so this is important because the behavior and work style of a growth lead in large part determines the work style of the team, right? And so it will determine whether the team is really goal oriented or are they just going to sit back and be relaxed. Are they going to be impatient for results, or are they just going to wait to get everything right first before they do everything, right? So this is extremely important. And so when I mapped all of these growth leads onto this sort of display, that hypothesis of mine indeed came true, were that most of them, in terms of their default work style patterns, would be focused on innovation and agility, right? And as you would expect, this is completely visionary people, very tolerant of risk, but also very entrepreneurial, very creative, very problem solving default work style, right? Just because something's working doesn't mean you give up, right? Just keep going. And again, there was just anecdotal evidence before this that this may be true, but now finally we start to see some data around this. Now, one thing you may be thinking of is, okay, not everybody is in this quadrant, right? So what gives with these other people? And that is not to say that these people are terrible growth leads. In fact, all of them are from great companies. and are great at leading growth themselves. All this is telling us is that for people who are not wired to operate in this innovation and agility quadrant by default, have somehow figured out how to stretch their default work style behavior into that style of working. And the way they've done that is through a combination of self-awareness, training, right? Maybe even intuition that the way I am hardwired to work is not going to help this team, crack the goals it needs to, right? And so how do I need to then behave differently? And so, again, this is a great sort of point to reiterate the fact that all of this quantification of work style patterns is simply about what are we hardwired for by default, not like we can't behave in different ways if we weren't challenged to. And so this has a knock-on impact then in how the team behaves. And there are three ways this has an impact. One, in the way the team communicates. Second, in the way the team takes action. And three, the way it makes decisions. And so if we were to superimpose all of these growth leads into a communication style quadrant, you can see that they actually, most of them fall almost in the midpoint of two different communication styles. And this was surprising at first to me because I was expecting almost everybody to be in this persuading quadrant, just given the nature of growth being a team sport, right? But the telling style of communicating makes a lot of sense too, right? Because if growth is about anything, it's about urgency and moving fast, right? And so you have to be very assertive, you be very strong in your opinions. And of course, those opinions are based on data, right? That I know because of 100 experiments we've run that doing something is not going to make sense as much as something else, right? And so that's how everybody's expected to behave, and then make decisions very quickly and move on. And the persuading style, of course, makes sense because go back to even the persuader work style pattern that this is a team sport, right? It's not about the highest paid person's opinion and you're going to do it just because the CEO said so or because some VP said so. It's because here you have data. Let me convince you why we should do X versus Y, right? So this makes a lot of sense too. If we then look at the impact of the work styles of growth leads in terms of how the team takes action, again, if the growth lead is going to determine the culture and the way the team operates, it makes complete sense that they would then also want the team to operate the way they are hardwired to operate, because that's what the growth team needs, right? So they need the team to operate in this innovation style of taking action, right? Which is all about challenge the status quo, it's move fast, it's try new things, it's learn from your mistakes, and so this makes a lot of sense as well. And the last thing is about how uh, the growth lead impacts decision making, right? And again, as we've spoke about earlier, people should have opinions, right? But because it's a team and it's not about the highest paid person's opinion, they will ensure that everybody's opinion is considered. Like, this is not the kind of team where you get to be passive, or be quiet and say, okay, it's because you I'll go with your idea because you said so. Like, everybody is encouraged to actively participate, right? And challenge the status quo, because you never know where your next step change of growth will come from. And so all ideas have to be on the table, which means everybody engages and challenges what already happened, in the service of discovering something our way. Right? And ultimately that's what leads to the best decision for the team to move forward. And so you may be thinking, this is great, right? But I don't have the budget, or I don't know about this tool. How do I apply all of this to my context? And you can almost boil down all of these behaviors into 4 questions that gives you a much better sense of, is the person I'm considering to lead growth, they exhibit the kind of behaviors I need them to exhibit? Can they be focused on innovation and agility? Can they move fast, right? And so the first question you might want to ask is, like, how do you balance the need to get things done versus finding better ways to do them, right? Because there is this cliche, right, of done is better than perfect, and that is absolutely true in growth, right? But that doesn't mean that you're not results oriented, right? You still have to produce results and keep things moving, right? And so there's a balance to be struck between done is better than perfect but also being results oriented, right? And so the answer to this question will give you a better indication of is this person truly comfortable in that sort of an environment. The second question is, like, how do you handle a situation where you had to deliver something with very few guidelines? And again, if you've been in growth, it's all about finding new ways of doing things. So you're literally building the playbook as you move along. There are no guidelines, there are no rules. You're breaking existing norms and conventions, right? So, and there are some people that are comfortable with that, and there are some people that need a lot of detail and guidance. And that's not a ding on those people, because there are some specific roles that are great for those kind of people, right? But if you want somebody to lead growth, you're talking about somebody who can take a little bit of information and run with it, right? And make things happen. So this will give you a sense of, is that person capable of operating in that way? Third question, this is a really interesting one, which is, tell me about a time where you had to change directions quickly, and like, how did you respond and what was the outcome, right? I mean, just look at what we've been living through for the last year, right? With COVID, like when it hit and lockdowns happened, all the old rules out the door, right? I mean, what was the most important thing? Toilet paper, right? If you were selling B2B SaaS, you were competing with toilet paper for priority, right? And so when all the rules have changed and you need to change directions very quickly, like, how do you do that? Like, some people freeze, whereas some people lean into it and say, oh, this is an opportunity to try something completely new. So you know knowing more about how they dealt with a situation like this gives you a lot of insight into how agile they are in their thinking and how do they respond under pressure. And the last question is, but tell me about a time where the solution to a problem may have been different than what had been done before. And this tells you about how comfortable they are about challenging the status quo, right? And status quo isn't just about the way the company has done things forever. It's, you may have run some experiments in the past and gotten some big wins, but you can't afford to sit on your laurels just because you got a big win last year, right? You've got to constantly be challenging, like, that worked then, like, is it still working now? And how fast can you move to prove or disprove that? And again, some people are comfortable with that and some people are not. Some people need a lot of time, and some people are very process oriented and need a very stable, unchanging environment, which is okay for certain kinds of jobs, but not somebody who's going to be leading growth, right? So hopefully this gives you a bit of a framework for identifying great growth people. And these could be people you're considering hiring or moving internally from your company into leading growth for the first time, or anything in between. And so this brings me then to my last hypothesis that I wanted to cover, which was that the work style strengths of growth leads are actually not enough to execute on the strategic priorities of growth teams. And so when I surveyed all of these growth leads for their work style patterns, what I also surveyed them for was for them to tell me what they thought the strategic priorities of growth teams could be. And I gave them a list of 20, which you'll see mapped out on the right hand side, and there are 5 priorities that fall into each quadrant. And I asked them to pick their top 6, 8 priorities. And across the board, what I got was priorities that fell across quadrants. Now, this is important because the cliche is that, oh, you should hire everybody who's focused on innovation and agility, and you want everybody that moves fast, and everybody who's okay with done is better than perfect on a growth team. And that could not be further from the truth, because let's say, for example, if I hired a data analyst, you can be sure I want that kind of person to be focused on results and does need to be very precise, because those results are going to determine what actions we take, right? That is not the kind of person who I want saying, I did a sort of cursory analysis and done is better than perfect. Like, that is the death knell for the growth team, right? But on the other hand, you may want an engineer who's very comfortable with their code being thrown away and trying to hack their way through putting different pieces of products together, and just being okay with experimenting. There are some engineers who are not okay with that, and they take great pride in their work and want to see whatever they've coded last for a long time. And that's not the kind of person you might want as a growth engineer. And so in that case, that's the kind of person you may want, who's very similar to your growth lead, right? And so what this tells us is that as your growth team expands, you want people that help balance out the growth lead, because that is the only way that the growth team will be able to hit all of its strategic priorities, right? And so again, I hope this gives you a sense of when we talk about growth and all of the process stuff, and like all of that is great, right? And very essential, for us to know about all of the skills needed for growth, right? But without the right person leading growth, you will not have the ability to have the right person in the right seat, and certainly won't have the ability then to hire or complete the rest of the growth team with the right kind of people that complement this specific style of the growth lead that's needed to unlock and achieve the kind of breakout growth that your team needs. Right. So if any of this was useful to you, or you're like, I want to learn more, again, I'm happy to connect. I'm sure we'll connect through the event. But if you have the LinkedIn app, scan it, take a screenshot of this. I'm happy to connect anytime and nerd out about this. Like, this is, to me, probably the most important topic in growth. And so I think the more people that engage with this, I think the better it is, not only for growth as a discipline, but I think you for your individual businesses and your growth teams. So that's all I had, and enjoy the rest of the event.